Really? Really, old man? Marine? And what's this? 04273? Do you know how archaic that tattoo looks?
It's just a tattoo, one laughed. 3 minutes later, the Marines saw the veterans' code and lined. It's just a faded old tattoo, probably fake, laughed trucker Jake Morrison, as 72-year-old Arthur Peterson rolled up his sleeve at Ellie's diner. Morrison had no idea 3 Marines at the corner booth had just recognized the Iwo Jima Memorial Inc. and were about to pay their respects. Master Sergeant Arthur Peterson, Korean War veteran, endured daily mockery about his faded Marine Corps tattoo while eating alone on Veterans Day. His service memories remained vivid, but civilian respect had vanished with his advancing age and weathered appearance. The 3 young Marines finishing breakfast recognized authentic military ink that told stories of sacrifice their generation inherited. Their coordinated response would remind Ellie's diner why some tattoos deserved reverence, not ridicule. Arthur Peterson's Korean War service and heroic legacy Master Sergeant Arthur Peterson had served with 1st Marine Division during Korean War's bloodiest campaigns, including Chosin Reservoir, where his squad leadership and personal courage under Chinese assault had earned Silver Star while saving Marines whose families would never know how close they'd come to losing sons and fathers. His faded tattoo depicted Iwo Jima, flag-raising with personal additions honoring fallen Marines from his Korean platoon, including Corporal Maria Sanchez, whose death during Chinese counterattack had haunted Arthur through 70 years of civilian life that never adequately addressed combat trauma or survivor's guilt. The ink had been fresh when Arthur returned from Korea in 1953, its bold lines and patriotic imagery representing pride in service and brotherhood with Marines whose sacrifice had protected American interest during forgotten conflict that civilian populations rarely understood or properly honored. Arthur's transition to civilian life included career as high school history teacher, marriage, children, and community service. But his military identity remained central to personal values and daily routines that honored fallen comrades through Veterans Day observances and memorial activities. His current isolation resulted from advancing age, deceased spouse, distant children, and community indifference toward elderly veterans whose service was increasingly forgotten by civilian populations focused on contemporary issues rather than historical military sacrifice, requiring ongoing recognition and respect. Ellie's diner culture and civilian indifference. Ellie's Diner served blue-collar workers, truckers, and local residents whose understanding of military service was limited to popular culture rather than personal experience or family military tradition that might have provided respect for veteran customers requiring appropriate recognition. The diner's atmosphere emphasized casual interaction and crude humor that often targeted elderly patrons whose appearance or behavior made them vulnerable to mockery from younger customers lacking empathy or understanding about aging, disability, or service-connected conditions affecting veteran populations. Manager Steve Wilson tolerated customer harassment of elderly patrons while prioritizing revenue over dignity. His business philosophy emphasizing turnover and profit, rather than creating welcoming environment for all community members, including veterans whose patronage deserved institutional respect. The 3 young Marines active duty prospective corporals, Michael Rodriguez, Sarah Chen, and David Torres, represented new generation of Marines whose deployment experience in Iraq and Afghanistan had taught them respect for military tradition and veteran sacrifice that their service continued through contemporary operations requiring understanding of historical precedent and institutional honor, transcending generational boundaries. Public mockery and veteran humiliation. Arthur Peterson's routine Veterans Day breakfast at Ellie's Diner began peacefully until trucker Jake Morrison noticed the elderly veteran's faded tattoo while Arthur struggled to cut his meal with hands weakened by arthritis that military service and advancing age had created through decades of physical labor. "Look at Grandpa's fake war tattoo," Morrison announced loudly enough for entire diner to hear his crude humor designed to entertain other customers, while humiliating elderly patron whose dignified bearing suggested military background that civilian audiences couldn't recognize or appreciate. Probably got that ink at some carnival thinking it makes him look tough. Added construction worker Bill Thompson, his mockery reflecting ignorance about military tattoo traditions and veteran identity that authentic service members understood as sacred personal history rather than decorative artwork. Arthur maintained military composure despite civilian cruelty. His decades of experience with post-war indifference having taught him survival strategies that preserved personal dignity while avoiding confrontation that might escalate into violence or additional humiliation. That's supposed to be Iwo Jima, but it looks more like kids playing capture the flag. Morrison continued his historical ignorance, evident in dismissal of iconic Marine Corps image representing sacrifice that protected civilian freedoms he exercised daily without understanding their cost. The systematic mockery attracted other customers whose participation transformed Arthur's peaceful breakfast into public spectacle, where elderly veteran faced community harassment that violated basic human decency while dishonoring military service that deserved civilian recognition rather than ridicule and systematic discrimination, escalating harassment and community participation. "Hey, Marine, tell us about your war stories. Bet you killed thousands of enemies from your couch watching John Wayne movies." Thompson taunted his systematic harassment designed to strip Arthur of dignity while entertaining civilian audience that found veteran humiliation amusing, rather than recognizing moral failure in their community response. The diner staff ignored harassment while prioritizing customer service for paying patrons whose crude behavior generated atmosphere that drove away vulnerable populations, including elderly veterans whose patronage deserved protection rather than tolerance for systematic abuse and public humiliation. Maybe he got that tattoo to impress girls back when black and white TV was new technology. Added another customer, their collective mockery creating hostile environment where elderly veteran faced systematic discrimination disguised as harmless humor. Arthur's military bearing remained intact despite emotional pain that civilian cruelty inflicted through deliberate targeting of service identity that represented his most meaningful life experiences and personal values that had sustained him through 7 decades of civilian transition challenges. Waitress, does this old-timer get some kind of senior discount for his play-acting military service? Morrison called out his question, designed to further humiliate Arthur, while suggesting that veteran status was performance rather than authentic service record deserving community respect and institutional recognition. Silent dignity and military pride. Arthur Peterson sat straighter in his booth, despite arthritis pain and emotional assault from civilian customers whose freedom to mock military service had been protected by Marines like himself who'd faced enemy fire that these men would never understand or personally experience. His faded tattoo remained visible on his forearm as he continued eating with military discipline that didn't acknowledge harassment, his dignity intact despite systematic attack on service identity that represented lifetime of values and brotherhood that civilian mockery couldn't diminish or destroy. "I earned this ink carrying Marines off Heartbreak Ridge while Chinese forces tried to kill us all," Arthur whispered to himself, his voice too quiet for harassers to hear, but maintaining internal dialogue that honored fallen comrades whose memory sustained him through civilian indifference and systematic discrimination. The 3 Marines at Corner Booth had been observing harassment with growing anger, their own military experience recognizing authentic service in Arthur's bearing, while civilian mockery violated everything they'd been taught about honoring veteran sacrifice and military tradition that transcended generational boundaries. "Semper Fi, Grandpa," Corporal Rodriguez whispered under his breath, his respect for Arthur's visible service contrasting sharply with civilian harassment that demonstrated community failure to recognize military sacrifice deserve honor rather than systematic ridicule and public humiliation that violated moral standards. Marine recognition and honor activation. Corporal Michael Rodriguez's recognition of Arthur's authentic Marine Corps tattoo triggered immediate response from his fellow Marines whose own service in Iraq and Afghanistan had taught them reverence for veteran sacrifice and military tradition that civilian populations often failed to understand or appropriately honor. Corporals, that's real ink on a real Marine who served in Korea when Chinese forces were trying to kill Americans protecting South Korean freedom, Rodriguez announced to his teammates whose military training immediately shifted their attention from breakfast to Brother Marine requiring support. The 3 Marines' coordinated response demonstrated institutional loyalty that transcended generational boundaries while honoring veteran whose service had established precedent for their own military careers through sacrifice and brotherhood that connected Korean War with contemporary operations. Additionally, Corporal's Master Sergeant Peterson's tattoo includes personal memorial elements honoring fallen Marines from his unit, making civilian mockery particularly offensive to military tradition and veteran dignity. Rodriguez continued. Corporal Sarah Chen recognized professional responsibility to protect elderly veteran from systematic harassment, while demonstrating proper military courtesy that civilian establishments should have provided through appropriate respect for decorated service members. Furthermore, corporals, our response will educate civilian population about military service recognition while ensuring Master Sergeant Peterson receives honor that his Korean War sacrifice earned through combat operations protecting American interests, Rodriguez declared. Military formation and civilian education. The 3 Marines rose simultaneously from their booth with military precision that immediately changed diner atmosphere as their coordinated movement demonstrated disciplined response to civilian harassment of elderly veteran whose service deserved protection rather than systematic mockery and public humiliation. Attention in the dining area, Corporal Rodriguez announced with command voice that made civilian conversation stop, while his military bearing commanded respect that Arthur's age and weathered appearance had failed to receive from ignorant customers. Their formation approach to Arthur's booth created visual demonstration of military courtesy, while providing educational opportunity for civilian audience whose harassment had revealed ignorance about veteran recognition and appropriate community response to military service. Master Sergeant Peterson Corporals Rodriguez, Chen, and Torres, United States Marine Corps, requesting permission to join your table and honor your Korean War service. Rodriguez announced with formal military protocol that contrasted sharply with civilian disrespect. The Marines' visible respect transformed Arthur from harassment target to honored veteran, as their military courtesy demonstrated proper recognition while educating civilian witnesses about appropriate veteran treatment and community responsibility. Additionally, Master Sergeant Peterson, your service with 1st Marine Division during Korean conflict established military tradition that our generation continues through deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Rodriguez continued creating generational connection that honored historical service while demonstrating ongoing Marine Corps values. Community transformation and respect demonstration. The Marines' formation around Arthur's table created powerful visual demonstration that transformed civilian mockery into community education while establishing protective presence that would prevent continued harassment through military authority and visible support. Ladies and gentlemen, Master Sergeant Peterson served during Korean War when Chinese forces were trying to kill Americans defending South Korean independence through combat operations that protected freedoms you exercise daily. Corporal Chen announced to gathering crowd. Their educational presentation included details about Korean War significance, Marine Corps sacrifice, and veteran recognition that civilian ignorance had prevented understanding, while their protective presence ensured Arthur's dignity was restored through appropriate military courtesy. Furthermore, Master Sergeant Peterson's tattoo represents authentic military service, including memorial honors for fallen Marines whose sacrifice protected American interests during forgotten conflict that deserves community recognition rather than systematic mockery. Torres added, social media documentation by diner patrons would transform local education into viral content, demonstrating proper veteran recognition while condemning civilian harassment that had violated community standards and moral obligations to military personnel. Additionally, Master Sergeant Peterson's Korean War service established foundation for contemporary Marine operations, while his veteran status deserves civilian respect rather than harassment that violates everything we've sworn to protect, Chen declared. The Marines' intervention created permanent community change while ensuring Arthur received honor that his service deserved through military tradition and brotherhood that would protect him from future civilian discrimination and systematic harassment. Military courtesy and generational connection. The three Marines' formal request to join Arthur Peterson created moment of profound military recognition as Korean War veteran faced active duty personnel whose service in Iraq and Afghanistan connected directly to his own combat experience protecting American interests through overseas military operations. Master Sergeant Peterson, it would be our honor to share breakfast with Marine whose Korean War service established military tradition that our generation continues through contemporary deployments defending American freedoms. Corporal Rodriguez announced with respect that contrasted dramatically with civilian harassment. Arthur's emotional response was immediate and profound as he faced Marines whose recognition validated his service while providing brotherhood that civilian communities had failed to offer through decades of post-war indifference and systematic discrimination against veteran populations. "Corporals, please sit." It's been many years since fellow Marines showed interest in old Korean War stories that most people consider ancient history. Arthur replied, his voice carrying gratitude that 70 years of civilian life had rarely provided. The Marines' visible respect created educational moment for civilian witnesses, whose previous mockery was replaced by recognition that Arthur's faded tattoo represented authentic military service deserving community honor rather than systematic ridicule. Additionally, Master Sergeant Peterson, our generation learned about Korean War through military history training that emphasized Marine sacrifice during Chinese offensive operations, where your service saved American lives. Chen continued establishing historical context that civilian education had failed to provide. Civilian education and community transformation. The Marines' educational presentation transformed Ellie's diner from hostile environment into classroom, where civilian ignorance was replaced by understanding about military service, veteran recognition, and community responsibility to honor sacrifice that protected American freedoms. Master Sergeant Peterson served during Chosin Reservoir Campaign, where Marine units faced overwhelming Chinese forces in sub-zero temperatures while protecting American withdrawal that prevented total military disaster. Torres explained to gathering civilian audience. Their military knowledge provided historical context that civilian education had never adequately taught, while demonstrating respect for veteran whose service connected Korean conflict to contemporary military operations through institutional tradition and brotherhood. Furthermore, Master Sergeant Peterson's tattoo includes memorial elements honoring Corporal Maria Sanchez and other Marines who died during Chinese counterattacks that would have overrun American positions without heroic sacrifice. Rodriguez continued. The civilian response shifted from mockery to respectful attention as Marines provided education that transformed Arthur from harassment target to recognized hero, whose service deserved community appreciation rather than systematic discrimination. Additionally, Master Sergeant Peterson's Silver Star was earned during combat operations, where his leadership saved Marine lives while holding defensive positions against Chinese assault that threatened entire unit survival, Chen declared. Jake Morrison and other customers faced moral reckoning as their previous harassment was revealed as attack against decorated combat veteran whose sacrifice had protected freedoms they exercised without understanding military cost or veteran contribution to American security. Institutional recognition and permanent honor. Manager Steve Wilson faced community pressure to address systematic harassment that had occurred in his establishment while implementing policies ensuring veteran recognition and protection from civilian discrimination that violated community standards and moral obligations. Master Sergeant Peterson Ellie's Diner apologizes for customer harassment while establishing permanent policy honoring military service through veteran appreciation and community respect. Wilson announced recognizing need for institutional change. The Marines coordinated with local American Legion and VFW chapters to establish permanent veteran recognition program while ensuring Arthur received ongoing community support that honored his Korean War service through appropriate civilian appreciation. Additionally, Master Sergeant Peterson, your Korean War experience provides historical perspective that community educational programs should utilize for teaching military history and veteran appreciation, Rodriguez suggested. Federal Veteran Services Coordination included comprehensive support addressing Arthur's needs, while his case became catalyst for enhanced civilian-veteran relations through education and community responsibility programs. Furthermore, Master Sergeant Peterson Ellie's Diner will establish honor wall featuring local veterans, including memorial recognition for Corporal Maria Sanchez, whose sacrifice deserves community remembrance, Wilson declared. The permanent transformation ensured Arthur's continuing dignity while educating civilian populations about military service and veteran recognition that created community bonds honoring sacrifice rather than permitting systematic harassment that violated moral standards and constitutional principles that military service had protected through overseas combat operations. Congressional recognition would result from viral social media coverage demonstrating proper veteran treatment, while condemning civilian harassment that threatened community cohesion and military-civilian relations, requiring federal oversight and institutional accountability. Complete community transformation and veteran recognition. Arthur Peterson's transformation from harassment victim to community hero demonstrated how military recognition could inspire civilian education while creating permanent cultural change that honored veteran sacrifice through appropriate respect and institutional support. Ellie's Diner became veteran gathering place as Arthur's story inspired community recognition, while the honor wall featuring local military personnel created educational resource that prevented future harassment through ongoing military appreciation and historical understanding. The three Marines established permanent mentorship relationship with Arthur, while their intervention inspired community veteran services, providing medical support, social engagement, and recognition programs that addressed isolation affecting elderly veteran populations requiring civilian appreciation. Federal recognition included congressional testimony where Arthur's Korean War service influenced veteran affairs policy, while his case demonstrated successful community transformation, protecting military personnel from civilian harassment through education and institutional accountability. Social media coverage generated nationwide support for Arthur while condemning civilian harassment that had violated community standards, inspiring similar veteran recognition programs, protecting elderly military personnel from systematic discrimination through community education and moral obligation. National veteran recognition and community responsibility. Arthur's case inspired federal legislation enhancing veteran recognition while establishing community responsibility programs, ensuring elderly military personnel received appropriate respect rather than systematic harassment that violated moral standards and constitutional obligations. The Peterson Protocol became national standard for civilian-veteran relations while establishing rapid response networks protecting elderly veterans from community discrimination through education and institutional intervention when harassment threatened military dignity and constitutional rights. Congressional testimony established Arthur as expert witness on civilian-veteran relations, while his Korean War experience provided historical perspective that influenced military education and community appreciation programs honoring service that protected American freedoms. National recognition included Arthur's appointment to veteran advocacy boards, while his foundation provided resources for elderly veterans facing civilian discrimination requiring immediate intervention and long-term community support through education and moral accountability. His partnership with active duty Marines inspired intergenerational programs connecting historical military service with contemporary operations while demonstrating institutional continuity that honored sacrifice through ongoing brotherhood and community recognition. Brotherhood legacy and continuing honor. Arthur Peterson's recovery from civilian harassment to community recognition demonstrated resilience that military training had provided, while Marine intervention proved that brotherhood transcended generational boundaries when veteran dignity required protection from civilian discrimination. The three Marines' continuing relationship with Arthur created permanent support network, while their intervention inspired community transformation that would protect other elderly veterans from similar harassment through ongoing education and moral accountability. Ellie's Diner became symbol of community redemption, while Arthur's presence educated civilian populations about military service and veteran appreciation that created cultural change, honoring sacrifice rather than permitting systematic discrimination. His partnership with Marines demonstrated that military bonds remained strong across generations, while community recognition proved that civilian education could transform harassment into honor when appropriate intervention provided moral guidance and institutional accountability, protecting veteran dignity through ongoing respect and appreciation. National Civilian Veteran Relations and Community Education Revolution. The Peterson recognition transformed civilian veteran relations through comprehensive education programs, community responsibility initiatives, and institutional accountability, ensuring elderly veterans received appropriate respect rather than systematic harassment, violating moral standards and constitutional obligations. Arthur addressed community organizations monthly, his Korean War experience providing historical perspective that influenced civilian education, while his case demonstrated successful transformation of harassment into honor through military intervention and community accountability. The Department of Veterans Affairs created civilian education programs, ensuring community understanding of military service while establishing rapid response networks, protecting elderly veterans from discrimination through institutional oversight and moral accountability. Federal funding supported veteran recognition programs, while Arthur's foundation provided emergency assistance to elderly military personnel facing civilian harassment, requiring immediate intervention and long-term community support through education and cultural transformation. Arthur's personal victory and continuing mission. Arthur Peterson discovered that his Korean War service, once mocked by ignorant civilians, became foundation for community education, honoring military sacrifice while inspiring intergenerational connections between veteran populations and active duty personnel serving contemporary operations. His work establishing veteran recognition programs helped communities nationwide understand military history while ensuring elderly veterans received appropriate respect rather than systematic harassment through civilian ignorance and moral failure. The diner where he'd faced mockery became headquarters for veteran appreciation, demonstrating community transformation when civilian education replaced harassment with honor through institutional accountability and moral responsibility. Universal military service and community honor. Message: the Ellie's Diner incident proved that military service deserves civilian recognition regardless of age or appearance, while community education could transform harassment into honor when appropriate intervention provided moral guidance and institutional accountability. Arthur learned that surviving civilian discrimination created responsibility for protecting other veterans from similar harassment. Military Inc. tells stories of sacrifice that civilian ignorance cannot diminish. When Marines line up to honor their brothers, they remind communities that some tattoos are written in blood, not ink, and every line represents lives saved through service to country. In the end, Arthur Peterson learned that his faded tattoo wasn't losing its meaning with age, it was waiting for the right eyes to see it clearly. When those 3 Marines recognized his ink, they didn't just see a veteran, they saw their heritage, their future, and their responsibility to honor both. The end